bit about some updates from the war in Ukraine. So currently it is Thursday, September the 1st at 17:27, so about 5:30 p.m. here. So I'm kind of mainly going to talk about the most recent happening. So again, I don't like to do the hour by hour, day by day updates. I kind of like to stick to some of the bigger picture stuff. So what's happened a couple days ago? So on the 29th and 30th of August is Ukraine launched what appears to be a concerted counterattack on the southern front around what they would call the right bank or the west bank of the Dnieper River there, in the Kherson Oblasts, and so we're going to kind of talk a little bit about what we think that means and kind of a little bit of the goings on here. So I'm going to flash over to my Kherson map here. So actually, you know what? I'll pop out my Google Earth here. So we'll kind of use this real quick, just get an idea of the extent of the Russian lines, kind of up until currently, and at the start of this alleged counteroffensive. So the Russians lines run to about halfway between Mykolaiv and Kherson, and then they kind of run right up and along through some of these smaller towns here. Bladatne, Kislevika, whatever. I don't speak Ukrainian. And then up to this, so this kind of squiggly line here, that's the Inulets River. So it runs right here, and then it basically runs exactly along where the Russian front line is here. So the Russians essentially controlled, what would be their line of advance was basically along the Inulets River here. You flash over to the Zaporizhia front here. So the Zaporizhia, the Russians are not quite up to the city itself, but up to the nuclear power plant. So I'll flash out here. So where the Dnieper makes this big, kind of curve in the reservoir here, and this runs, basically directly east and west, the Russian lines basically follow directly here. So I took all the labels off the map so you can see what we're talking about. So this is the Inulets River that runs right here, and then it becomes this super squiggly thing right there. So the Russian lines are basically level with this east-west running bank of the Dnieper over to here, and then kind of down along the Inulets here, and then roughly over and kind of splitting between. This is Mykolaiv here, and this is Kherson here, on the other side of the Dnieper River here. So I've been saying for a long time that the Ukrainians were going to have to mount some sort of large-scale counteroffensive at some point. Because as it sits right now, we need to make sure that we state all this correctly. Russia is winning. They're still taking territory, albeit slowly, grindingly. They're destroying everything with artillery. Nothing is particularly clean or good-looking or fast, but they are continually taking bites of Ukrainian territory and solidifying, from an administration standpoint, what they already have. So now we'll kind of flash back over here again. So a couple things I want to state as we're sort of talking about this counteroffensive is that, one, there's not a lot of information available. I mean, one, obviously, if you're Ukraine, you don't want to immediately release, press releases. Hey, we began our large-scale counteroffensive in exactly this town, and we're driving for exactly this town, because obviously that's stupid. The Russians have immediately begun talking about how they've killed thousands of Ukrainians and destroyed dozens or hundreds of tanks and things thus far, which is definitely 100% bullshit. So the truth is something in between there. And so we'll talk a little bit about what we know as far as some axes of advance and what I think potential goals and potential reasons are. Now, it's not to say that any one of these in and of themselves are correct or incorrect. They might, some of them might be, but kind of some of the reasons why a counterattack and the way that they're conducting their counterattack, some purposes it serves. So as it sits right now, we basically think that the Ukrainians have launched a counterattack on essentially three axes. So from the north of the pocket here, around Petrivka, roughly around Davidiv Brid here and Suki Stavak in this area here, and then in the south, roughly towards Alexandrivka or, Pravdin here in this area. So roughly three, what we think, axes. Now, we don't know if and which one of these is, are feints, which ones are serious. It's still too early to tell. like 1 or 2 days, a couple days into a counterattack, we don't have enough information to be like, hey, this is what what their exact plan is. We know this is the real thrust. These ones are fake and feints, things like that. We just don't really know. But so what we can talk about is some of the conditions that led to this, and what I think reasons are that Ukraine would launch this type of counterattack. And so one, I want to start with setting of what we would consider setting conditions for a counteroffensive. So I'm going to flash out here to my regular Google Maps. So I took the labels off. I'm going to put the labels back on. Just so we can see a little bit about what's going on. So like I said, we're in this area here. So roughly directly where these lines are. So this is the Kherson Oblast that comes up here. So the Russians are basically controlling the Kherson Oblast, as it sits, splitting between Mykolaiv and Kherson and then up the Inulets River here. So a couple things. So what we know is that once Ukraine got the HIMARS systems and the M270 MLRS systems from America, they've been massively attacking Russian ammunition depots, what we call ground lines of communication. So the ground lines of communication are basically the routes in which one gets things from their rear to their front. So it's roads, it's rail, it's also otherwise like fields or otherwise passable terrain that one gets there. So like I said, so what the lines of communication are in the military sense is basically the routes in which you get from your front to your rear and your rear to your front. So Ukraine has been interdicting things with HIMARS, kind of all along this, eastern and southern bank of the Dnieper, attacking, ammunition depots, attacking, concentrations, otherwise like communication centers, command and control centers, things like that. We know that they've conducted multiple attacks that we're uncertain of what munitions were used, but in the Zankoy region here, there's an airfield down closer to Sevastopol at Saki. They attacked, did a very good job of attacking an airfield there. So when we talk about setting conditions, so setting conditions for a counteroffensive in this particular case. So one, you need to attrit the enemy's supplies, their command, their control, their communications, things like that. You need to interdict the ability of the enemy to maneuver elements both into and within your proposed combat zone, so that you can have some freedom of movement. And you need to limit or in some way disrupt his ability to conduct successful reconnaissance, close air support, strategic air campaigns, things like that. It also means setting conditions, could be giving equipment to partisans, giving specific missions and things to partisans, i.e. your irregular, your kind of guerrilla forces are going to be fighting. And eventually getting the enemy to a position where you think that you can then attack them. So kind of along with that, so something I've talked about in other videos of mine is that when one is attempting to exhaust an enemy or run, a campaign, a strategy of exhaustion. So I said there's two things that you have to have in order for that to work. So one, you have to in some way be able to affect the supply of the things that you're trying to exhaust. So this could be attacking factories or otherwise industry, like where you make it. It could be attacking the raw materials that are then sent to the factory to make things. Or it could be attacking the routes of transport, rails, roads, waterways, things like that. So how you get it from the factory, from the depots, actually out to the front line. So you have to affect the ability to replenish the supply of something. That's one of the two keys. And the other one is that you have to make an enemy use the supplies of something that they already have. And I think that one gets overlooked a lot of times. We talk about, having a strategic campaign, this or that. But if the enemy is not being forced to use the supplies that they have, the strategy exhaustion either is not going to work or it's going to take much, much longer. So those are kind of conditions set. So now let's talk about reasons why I think that the Ukrainians have decided to counterattack in the places that they have. So we'll kind of flash back to our Kherson specific map here. So one thing that we know for certain is that with the HIMARS system, The Ukrainians have been able to successfully attack what's called the Antonovsky Bridge here, which runs through Kherson itself. This is a dam here at Nova Kakhovka, and there's also like a bridge that runs across the dam. And so the Ukrainians have been able to interdict and destroy those, or otherwise render unusable those bridges to cut the supply of, from the eastern side of the river to the western side of the river. The Russians have built pontoons, they've used ferries, and the Ukrainians have, continually attacked them as well. So the Ukrainians have also been talking for a long time about a massive counterattack they were going to, conduct in the south. Now, whether this is actually a massive counterattack or not, we don't really know at this point. However, we do know that the Russians have continued to put additional reinforcements, additional units. They sent, within the last month or month and a half, they sent about 25,000 more troops to the area. So the Russians have also conducted some advances of their own in recent days. So they've been pushing, towards things, so pushing in the Petrivka area here, in the Arkhangelsk region here. They've also conducted some assaults roughly towards Mykolaiv, and they were in and around, did not completely control Mykolaiv, but at earlier stages they were further over to here in this area. So a couple things. So one reason why a counterattack in this area is good. So obviously, like I said, is the Ukrainians. There's only like two ways that the Russians can get heavy military equipment across the lower Dnieper here. And once the HIMARS arrived in theater, the Ukrainians were able to immediately interdict that. I think that definitely took the Russians completely by surprise, just how effective HIMARS was at interdicting what is otherwise a very small target in these bridges here. So being able to interdict that, meaning that for lack, I'm speaking a little bit more dramatic than is true, but basically sealing everything that is on this side of the river onto this side of the river, i.e. cutting off the supply, things like that. So now, launching a counteroffensive makes sense because, one, there is certainly a lot of Russian troops and equipment and material on this side of the river. And now that we know that their ability to supply that is interdicted, the Ukrainians need to make them use the supplies that they have, i.e. they cannot allow the Russians to just sit there, get comfortable, set up defensible lines that they can stay in throughout the fall rainy season and the winter and things like that. So we know that they're not going to be able to replenish their supplies, so they need to make them use the supplies, i.e. with a counteroffensive. Right along the same lines is because the Russians are going to be unable to get their large equipment, their large military equipment back across the river, the opportunity is there for the Ukrainians to capture it or to destroy large amounts of Russian equipment, whether tanks and armored vehicles and artillery and things like that, or even just trucks and supplies and things like that, along with troops. So we know that the Russians have sent some of their DNR and LPR troops there that are relatively untrained and unprofessional, but there does exist a lot of professional Russian units there. So treating the enemy, whether through killing them, wounding them, capturing them, treating the trained enemy is hugely beneficial. We definitely want to diminish the enemy's capabilities by diminishing the training level of their troops. So that makes a lot of sense there. So the potential for the equipment and stuff there. Conversely, along with that is we know that fall's approaching and Ukraine has a very rainy fall season. So we know that within the next few weeks, when fall rains and things start, that most of these fields and things are going to become impassable. And so exactly what happened to the Russians when they launched their invasion at the end of February, where they're basically confined to roads because the ground wasn't hard enough or the ground thawed early enough that they could not use the fields. The same thing would then happen to the Ukrainians. So if they do not make a significant dent or significantly reduce this pocket in the next few weeks, they're going to run into a period of time when they only really have access for transportation and advance along roads, which means they're going to be much easier to target with indirect fire weapons, like tube and rocket artillery and air power and things like that. So they need to strike while the weather is still good. Another reason would be, one, pushing the Russians completely onto the other side of the river would give them a very good defensive line. So we'll just flash out here. So the Dnieper here, the Dnieper River is it is a very big river, right? So we're talking roughly in this area here. So if the Ukrainians are able to push the Russians entirely onto the other side of the river, then they would have a very strong defensive line that they could then set up and use that to anchor positions here throughout the winter. Whereas if the Russians are able to maintain a foothold on a bridgehead on this side, in the winter when they have access to more equipment, more troops, as they are, currently bringing forth more conscripts and things like that, and then with the ground being frozen, they'll be able to advance from more positions. That's definitely more potentially dangerous for the Ukrainians as far as that goes. So being able to get into a good position, prior to when the fields refreeze and everything after the fall rainy season and stuff like that will be beneficial. The other thing let me flash back out here if I can, is zoom in here a little bit. So this is Kherson here. Boop. So on this side of the river. So if we look, let me put roads back on here. So this is Crimean Peninsula here, obviously. So the Russians are currently able to move things along what they call the land bridge here, which is this highway that runs through. There we go. So this highway that runs through Mariupol and Berdyansk, which is why Mariupol was such an important thing that they attacked early on in the campaign. They're also able to come all the way south through Rostov down into Krasnodar and then across the Kerch Peninsula here into Crimea and then across. There's 2 points that come across the actual the neck of the Crimean Peninsula here. So you basically have like north of Zankoy here and then in Krasnoperekopsk here in Armyansk that comes through here. So if the Ukrainians are able to get themselves into Kherson proper, now if we look, using our little our legend down here, roughly speaking, is we're looking at somewhere around 60 miles, 50, 60 miles between Kherson and this area here, which means that the Ukrainians would be able to use their HIMARS systems and stuff to interdict stuff down there. It also means that with their artillery, the artillery range is somewhere roughly in the 20 to almost 30 mile range, depending on the system. If they have it in Kherson itself, which means they'll basically be able to kind of cover themselves out to a radius of around here, which means they could essentially, not clear, but they could essentially put this entire section of Ukraine under fire, and then, set the conditions for future advances into Crimea itself, which would be something that they obviously want to undertake in the future. So being able to set conditions and to get equipment in place that can then interdict this, and also being able to interdict this road that comes through Nova Kakhovka. This is the same road that comes back through Berdyansk. Let me move, and Mariupol here. So being able to interdict this highway, I think it's the M14 highway or something like that. I can't remember. But being able to interdict that would be huge, especially considering where the Russians are. So we said their line of advance is basically even with this. So this is the nuclear power plant right there. So their line of advance is basically right across here. So those would be major reasons why they would want to do that: to get that defensive line, to be able to bring this area under HIMARS and other types of potential weapons range. Even things like their Harpoon cruise missiles and stuff like that. Also gain themselves a little bit more access to the to the Black Sea stuff there, and get themselves positions where now if they're able to actually get areas to operate in here, this also opens up the potential of being able to conduct amphibious and marine related operations against Crimea and stuff like that. So being trapped over there and not having direct access here limits some of their attacking abilities as far as being able to prosecute towards Crimea. So those would absolutely be big reasons why why Ukraine would want to attack in the south there. It's also an area that is the furthest from Russia's main supply, main ability to support it. As far as indirect fire, or not indirect fires, but air power and things like that. So being able to attack down here, this is further away, from their supply than say things that are in Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts here and up around Kharkov, which is just right south of Belgorod, which is a major rail and road, kind of hub for the Russians. So it's definitely more ripe to attack that. The other thing with that is if and when the Ukrainians are able to get on this side of the river, now they're back in a position where they can, start to directly threaten to the east and threaten this land bridge. So as it sits right now, the Russians are this far up. So if the Ukrainians are able to push themselves to the Dnieper and potentially across, now you're starting to see where there is kind of this open flank. Now, granted, it's anchored on the river here, but it also means that the Ukrainians could conduct cross-river operations and stuff against the Russians, but it also means that now they can start to interdict in this direction. So these supplies now have to only come through Mariupol, up through Melitopol, which is just south of Zaporizhia here, and being able to interdict the Crimea with what I would assume would be the overall goal of attempting to completely sever the Crimean Peninsula itself, which would go a long ways to, for them to try to contract the front lines. Now, as I said, we don't really know the status of what's going on with this. Expect, Ukrainian casualty numbers to rise in the coming days. That's just the nature of conducting offensive operations. As we said, typically the general textbook rule is in an area you're conducting offensive operations, you want to have a 3-to-1 local superiority in numbers. Doesn't mean you have 3 times as many troops as the other guy. It means in the local area where you're attacking, you get a 3-to-1 advantage in numbers. And, there's a lot of things playing into this. So the Russians appear to be in a bad spot. However, some things that are working in the Russians' favor is, one, we know they have artillery units so this is a nuclear power plant, the Energodar nuke plant right here. We know the Russians have artillery units within the compound of the nuclear power plant, which it's clever. They know the Ukrainians cannot attack them there for risk of causing, catastrophic devastation to their entire country. So the river also provides them a very good barrier to put artillery units and things on this side and being able to fire them at the Ukrainians here. So even as the Ukrainians push back and push up to here, the Russians still have this very good barrier in between them, where as long as they can keep the counter battery fire and the drone operations somewhat down, they can really interdict the Ukrainian operations. Now, another reason why the Ukrainians probably wanted to conduct a counteroffensive operations there is we know that Iran, struck a deal with Russia to provide them a whole bunch of drones, and we know that Russia has started to get some of them. So if you're Ukraine, you need to try to make hay. You need to try to make some gains and some positive progress before the Russians get a huge influx of drones. Because we know from other reports that the lack of drones and the destruction of drones has seriously hindered the Russian abilities to use indirect fire. So as they get more drones, we know they have a huge advantage in total artillery and artillery, ammunition supply. So the Ukrainians need to try to cause the kind of damage or as much damage as they can before the Russians get a serious influx of drones that massively increases their effectiveness with their artillery. So that's definitely a big thing for the Ukrainians. And then something that cannot be overlooked is if you're Ukraine right now, you've been playing defense basically the whole time. And if I compare things to like martial arts, like I always do, is basically Ukraine is a wounded fighter that's kind of sitting against the cage right now. He's not taking any ground. He's not really any threat to, suddenly explode out and, win this fight immediately. But while the other guy is attacking him and kind of pecking at him and winning the fight, he's occasionally able to throw back some really hard strikes and hit the guy as he comes in. So he's making the guy have to be careful. That's kind of Ukraine and Russia right now. Is Russia is still taking ground, still inflicting a lot of casualties, and also just destroying humongous parts of Ukraine and tons of towns and villages and things like that. So Ukraine needs some sort of morale and propaganda related victory. So they know they can destroy Russian equipment at a very large scale, but now they also need to prove to themselves, prove to their people, prove to their military that they can attack the Russians on relatively even footing, defeat them, and push them back and recover ground that matters not in a tactical sense, but an operational strategic sense, which a victory in this particular type of campaign or pushing the Russians back here would absolutely be an operational victory. And like I talked about in other videos, operational, one of the ways that I break down what makes something at an operational level versus tactical strategic, what I think for me is a very easy way to think of it is operational level is the tactics at the corps level and above, or the division level and above. So you're talking like tens of thousands of guys. So it takes into consideration a lot of space, a lot of transport, a lot of lines of communication related stuff. So how can we take over the kinds of towns that have road centers, railway heads, things like that, to allow us to maneuver, to put units where we need to get them for the follow-on operations, versus strictly, destroying an enemy here, surrounding a pocket of enemy there. Okay, what does this get us that allows me to maneuver these large amount of troops in a way that can like actually paralyze and fracture the line? So as more information becomes available, I'll kind of continue with that. I suppose one last point that I could kind of make with this is, as it sits right now, based on the manpower and supply issues that have been kind of reported, coming both from Ukraine and Russia, it kind of appears that Russia can only basically focus on one offensive or one operation at a time currently. And so currently their main focus is over in this area here. So between Donetsk city and then Bakhmut. So the Russians are still trying to take Bakhmut here, which they haven't quite taken it yet. So we'll keep my cursor there. So this is where Bakhmut is. And so taking Bakhmut here puts them on a road center that opens them to be able to take Sloviansk and Kramatorsk from the west and south potentially. We also know they're driving from Izium. So if you look, this is the borders of Donetsk Oblast here. So the main cities, Donetsk has already been taken, Mariupol's already been taken, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk remain under control of the Ukrainians. Bakhmut is basically being fought over currently, and there's still kind of a pocket in sort of this corner that's right here. So around Siversk and Pesky and places like that over here. So this is kind of still a pocket basically in this area here. So where Siversk is and all that. So while the Russians are conducting their offensive, operations there, if Ukraine is able to strike them hard enough and effective enough somewhere else, it'd go a long ways to taking pressure off somewhere else. Or conversely, if the Russians try to keep up the pressure here, but they're unable to successfully deal with multiple different, multiple different fronts and multiple different army groups there, then that would give the Ukrainians a much more free hand to kind of go about their operations. But that's pretty much all I've got for tonight. If you guys have more information as things come out, if you have questions, by all means, hit me up in the comments. But remember, guys, only the hits count, and you can never miss fast enough to catch back